Hello, wildlings. I'm your Creepsmith, and you found my Fear Forge. Lucky you.
Welcome back, wildlings. Today's historical horror, Blue Light, by Colin'sHomefortheDamned. A bomb went off in the city. It happened on Monday. Today's Thursday. My dad was there, and he hasn't come back yet. I've been sitting at the window every day, waiting for him to come home. Mom says the bomb interrupted the electric grid in the city, so there's been barely any news about it. Our neighbor's son is a meteorologist stationed outside the city limits, and he told his father, who told us. The bomb was the biggest he'd ever seen. He saw a flash of blue light from outside the window and threw himself to the ground. He counted 5 because it was his job to record the phenomenon. At 5, the windows exploded into the room and heat like a furnace rushed over him. His father says that he managed to call from an emergency line in the station. They say he's wounded, but that he's going to be all right. Dad was supposed to come home Monday night. Mom has been very quiet for the last few days. She doesn't say much at breakfast and only gives me an "I love you" at bedtime on her way out of the room. I only cry after that, in the dark. This morning, I stare outside the window, hoping by some miracle that I'd see him walking down the street and turn onto our walkway leading up to the house, smiling and waving at me. My heart leaps every time someone walks by. Mom comes in behind me. "Go upstairs. Get ready for school, please." I turn around in my chair, but staring out the window is not going to change anything. Now go. I leave the window feeling as though he won't come home unless I'm there, watching for him. Every day, it's gotten harder and harder to sit there at the window and watch. I have a need to run outside and look for him, to ask every person in every store if they've seen him anywhere at all, because I need him. I need him home to wake me up in the morning and help me with homework and tell me jokes at the dinner table and be there for me when I need advice or just to talk. And not be crushed under a mountain of concrete with pulverized shoulders that used to hold me during parades and let me press my face into them when I needed to cry. So I sob while I put my books into my bag, quietly, because I have not heard my mother cry, and she is not going to hear me do so. The front door swings open from downstairs. "Hello?" For 3 days, I have dreamed of that voice. "Dad!" I half scream and rush to the landing, looking down over the banister through vision obscured by tears. He was looking up at me. I couldn't tell if he was smiling or not, because of the tears. But I rushed down the steps and toward him with a hysterical laugh of relief. I stopped dead when I came closer to him. His face was a deep red, covered in blisters. His arms looked burned like they were held over a stove. His shirt was torn and covered in soot and maybe blood. "Dad, what?" "It's all right," he said. "Come on, give me a hug." I sprint up to him and dive into his arms, and he gives a little cry of pain. "Oh, God, Dad, I'm sorry," I mutter, trying to pull away. "It's all right," he says. "I'm just a bit sore, that's all." He looks up and behind me. Mom's been standing there, watching us. And she's finally crying. "Well, didn't you know I'd be back?" Dad says to her, smiling. She rushes over and the 3 of us begin hugging, and it's a long time before we break it up. "What happened to you?" asks Mom. Dad looks at me tentatively, and his face suddenly grows grave, pale. His eyes looked Did they look scared? I think it's best if you leave for a second while I talk to your mother. Don't you have school in a bit? Go ahead and get ready for me. I nod, turning away reluctantly, and as I head upstairs, I hear him say, "Come on, honey, let's sit down. I need some water." I return to my book bag with a different set of tears in my eyes. I knew he'd be fine. I just knew it. And why did I ever think that my dad could get hurt? He had to come home. And he did. That's all there was to it. And then I heard a gasping moan from downstairs. I turned towards the door and stopped when I remembered that he had told me to leave the two of them alone. But another moan floats through the door, and my curiosity gets the best of me. I creep through the door and down the hall to the landing. Leaning up against the wall with my ear between the banisters, they couldn't see me around the corner, but their words were clear as day. Just got to the hospital to inspect the facilities. It was around 8 in the morning. I was following the chief of staff to his office when it sounded like a cannon went off right beside me, and the wall next to me exploded. Mom made another sound like I'd heard from upstairs. I couldn't see her, but I could picture her face plain as day. She must have been chalk white. I was turning pale too. I found myself wondering how in the world that he could have survived that. Until Dad continued. I woke up sometime later. I really have no idea how much later. It was pitch black where I was and hot. Deathly hot. I put my hands out and I felt metal, hard as a griddle. 3 walls of metal, 1 of rock. And I remember asking myself if I was dead or captured or something else. I started scratching and clawing at the rock wall to get out. It looked like I was in some sort of enclosure, like a space just big enough for my body. I had yanked enough rock away from the wall to pull myself out. And I looked back and saw that I'd been under a steel desk that was thrown right side up on top of me. Turns out it was the perfect cover, but my skin felt horribly sunburned and the air was so hot it was like sitting in a sauna. I looked around and saw that I was standing on what was left of the 2nd floor, as it had come down on top of us. And I was alone. The hospital had fallen away in all different directions, so I could see the sky. It was so dark. It looked like a storm had taken just seconds to come on. Rain was coming down, except it wasn't rain. It was black, tarry. I climbed over the walls of the hospital, and I was so thirsty, so groggy. I knew that there'd be no running water, but we were close to the bay, and I crossed a river to get to the hospital, so I started making my way back to that. I was lucky to be close to the city limits. I doubt anyone downtown survived the collapse of all those huge buildings, but almost every building I passed was destroyed, and the ones that weren't were still burning. At first, I didn't see a single person. Then I came across a mother and her baby in an awning of concrete. It was hellish. The woman, her skin was peeling off in sheets, and her eyes were this bright gold white. She must have bleached them out looking at the explosion. Her baby was charred black. It looked rubbery in her arms. She was staring straight ahead, and the skin hanging off her arms was translucent like fly wings. The shock on her face made me nauseous. I called out to her, but she didn't hear me. I doubted that she would. She'd probably be deaf from being outside from the blast, if she was even still alive. I closed my eyes. What he was saying scared me. I didn't want to be there, but I was frozen against the wall, helpless to move, to do anything but listen. As I got closer to the riverside, I saw more and more people, some of them on their feet, some lying broken like rag dolls, some whose body parts were just barely sticking out of the rubble. The people on the ground were so burned they were swelling up. They looked like black rubber dolls. When I got to the river, and he stopped, choking on his words. Mom was dead silent now. I could imagine her dread was keeping her from even moaning. My heart was a hammer now. As I listened, I could see with clarity the ghastly sights my father had seen, and those images were burning into my mind's eye. I saw hundreds, literally hundreds of corpses covering the banks of the river, piled on top one another, trying to get one last drink. There were corpses floating down the river, too. I saw a woman pass who looked like she was wearing a long white cloth belt that was billowing out behind her, until I got closer and realized that it was her intestines, whitened by the water. On the other side of the river there were these large mounds piled up against the ruined walls facing the explosion, and people were standing around them, pulling the mounds apart. They were looking for their loved ones inside mounds of human beings. I saw children there on their knees screaming into them, "Daddy, are you in there? Mommy, please come out." And I stood there behind the bodies bordering the river like black and red sandbags, watching people float by, watching people dig into mountains of other people, watching people collapse where they stood, watching people with burst-out organs try and fit them back in, watching a man with eyes burned out of his head as he asked, "Is anyone there? Please, kill me." I stood there under the gray sky, watching all this as through smoke, as black rain fell, and you know what I realized? I realized that in all my thoughts, all my dreams of what hell might look like, I could never have imagined anything like this. I didn't need to, though. Hell came to me, to us. Hell came to Earth. I stood for a long time after that, my back still against the wall, the grotesque images swarming in front of me as if at the end of a black tunnel, the women writhing, the men pleading for death, the corpses grinning up at me as they floated by. My shirt peeled off the wall as I turned and ran to the bathroom. I bolted to the toilet and promptly vomited into the basin. My eyes felt like they'd burst under the pressure of my undigested breakfast. The monsters that I picture when I swing my closet door open or I look under my bed from on top, expecting to see a set of dripping white teeth over two glaring red eyes, those monsters are nothing to me now, nothing compared to these horrors. These people, they're real. And the ones who caused them this, there couldn't be anything more evil in the world. I knelt, dazed, over the bowl for minutes. I came out of it only when Mom knocked on the door and told me in a quiet voice that I'd be late for school if I didn't hurry. And 35 minutes later, I was sitting in class before the teacher came in. Before I'd left the house, I hugged my dad, who had fallen asleep on the couch where he sat. His face looked very lined, very tired under his blisters. He looked older, and I hated thinking of him that way, but I couldn't stop myself. I came out of my reverie slightly when the teacher came in at 11 o'clock, shushing the chattering class. He wrote the month, and then the 9th on the board before turning to us. "Kids," he said, "I know things have been scary these last couple of days, but we all need to remember to keep calm, okay? It's especially important to obey your curfews, not to cause a ruckus of any type. I'm talking, of course, about the incident that happened last night. It seems someone has defaced the school sign outside. You may have seen it on your way in this morning. Now, I hope the perpetrator is not part of my class, but if he or she is here, I ask that they come forward and confess. It doesn't have to be now, but it does have to be today." I'd seen the sign. The janitor was out there as we came in, scrubbing at the sign. It was faint, but we could still see the word "sucks" underneath Nagasaki Elementary School. And then, outside the windows, a blue light explodes across the sky. So yeah, I guess it's true. Sometimes we make our own hell. Stay scary, wildlings, and make the most of your nights.